Hey guys, I'm Priyanka. I'm a software engineer at SAP Labs. So this video is brought to you by Boss Coder Academy. Today we have a very special guest with us, Nayanva. So let's welcome Nayanva. Hi Nayanva, how are you?
Hey Priyanka, I'm good. Hope you're doing good as well. I hope things are keeping you well in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. So
Awesome.
Nayanva, can you give a quick introduction about you?
Hey, yes. So, I am currently working as a software engineer at Microsoft. Um, I have around 8.5 years of experience. Prior to Microsoft, I have worked with PhonePe and Snapdeal and Amadeus Software Labs. I have majorly worked on highly scalable systems and distributed systems throughout my career. I have been a backend engineer throughout it, and I kind of feel that's my forte. So, yeah, that's pretty much about it.
Amazing, Nayanva. Yeah. So would you like to tell us something about your college and your first job and when did you started your career? All about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I graduated from Techno India Salt Lake. It's under West Bengal University of Technology. I think it has been named as MACAUT now. Um, Yeah, so I did my BTech in computer science and engineering. I graduated in the year 2013. So I didn't have an on-campus offer actually. I got rejected by TCS and a few other organizations at that point in time. I appeared in GATE, but my rank wasn't great. It was around, I don't remember, but it was more than 3,000 is what I remember. Uh, so yeah, at that time I gave a PH test that's of Elitmus. So Elitmus has good contacts with quite a few product-based companies actually. So I took up that PH test, and it's mainly on like normal GAT type exam where they test you on your aptitude and logical reasoning and all of those things. And I had a decent score in that. I think I had around 97.6 percentile. So that kind of opened up a lot of opportunities. So I think if you have around 90 and above percentile, you start getting calls from a lot of organizations. So yeah, that was a very good opportunity, and that kind of opened many doors. So I started getting calls from multiple companies, but then I kept getting rejected in quite a few actually. I mean, I would go to the second round, or I would go to the final round and then get rejected. But finally, I got an offer from Amadeus Software Labs. I think that was like after 1 month of interviews, quite a few interviews in the middle, and then finally landed with an offer at Amadeus Software Labs.
Yeah, that's amazing. Even I got the offer same way. Even I didn't get college placement. I got off campus through
Oh,
Litmus. Yeah. So even I got
oh, is it?
yeah. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
So, Nayan, we would like to know, I mean, when did you join Microsoft? And like, there are so many people who wants to join Microsoft. So what is the interview process they have? I mean, if you would like to tell us, when did you join and
Sure,
how was the interview process?
sure. So I joined Microsoft in March 2020, 30th March 2020 to be precise. Um, the interview process is usually like they have 4 rounds of interview. It varies from SD1s to SD2s and to uh, senior roles. So yeah, I had 4 rounds of interview. One of them was proper problem solving and data structures round. One of them was discussing some low level designs and all of these. And then the third round was high level design, proper system design, architectural design kind of a round. And the last round was a directorial round where I was interviewed directly by the director of Microsoft Teams, the then director of Microsoft Teams. And that interview had kind of everything, like behavioral plus your problem solving and data structures plus understanding of systems and all of those things. So it was a mixture of all of that, to be honest. And that round went on for long. That was almost an hour to hour and a half long round. But I don't know, or I don't think that is the usual process every time. I don't think that is how it happens in every team or this one. That's what I have seen after I have started interviewing at Microsoft. But usually you have 4 rounds of interview. That final round, the directorial round, could be, or the hiring manager round could be like they can ask you anything. Like you have to be prepared for both sides. Like you could be asked a low-level design question or a normal problem solving and data structure question, or could be a high-level system design question, as well as behavioral rounds, because it's kind of they're trying to validate you on how well you fit in the team. Okay. So if I understand correctly, they test it from the behavioral perspective as well as from your knowledge and understanding of the systems, because when you come into the ecosystem, they would want you to have a certain level of understanding, right? Because there are team members in the team who would expect you to have a certain level of knowledge, right? So that is one of the reasons why they usually test you on both of the things, both of the sides, technical as well as
yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, so Nayan, like I know it's not an easy journey. So how did you prepare for the Microsoft's interview? What all things you did? What all preparation you did? If you can share some knowledge on that.
Right. So for Microsoft, the main idea was to to get better at problem solving and data structures, because so what happens is that with our career, I think we have seen this paradigm shift where initially we would be asked problem solving and data structure questions, which would be usually the famous ones, or an algorithm that you would know, and or the famous algorithms, and a little twist and turn of those algorithms. But then after, I think around that period of 2020 2021, where lead code and all started becoming, and competitive programming started becoming extremely popular in India, I think the level of interviews have changed a bit. Although it's not a competitive programming level, that's not how I would term it, because people are trying to test you on your data structures knowledge and algorithmic knowledge. Competitive programming is a little different side of it. I think that involves a lot of mathematics as well, apart from pure data structures and algorithms. But here it's more of like data structures and algorithms, how well you understand time complexities and all of those things, and how well versed you are with different types of algorithms, how well you implement those algorithms, apply those algorithms to your questions, problems, and then how you come up with solutions. So what I started doing was I started solving more and more of lead code problems. So prior to joining Microsoft, prior to this preparation, my preparation would always be from mainly from Gigs for Gigs. But this time I had switched to lead code apart from just Gigs for Gigs. And that's a good platform where you can actually test your algorithm, figure out what are the different types of test cases or edge cases that you're missing. You run your algorithm through a large set of test cases, and you get to know that your algorithm is optimized or anything of that sort. And system design, to be very honest, I have never prepared system design for any of my interviews. That basically is because I have worked on highly scalable systems all the time, like considering the period when I started at Snapdeal. In Amadeus, I was a QA engineer, but after that, when I started working at Snapdeal, since then, and then working at PhonePe, I have always been involved with different types of, highly scalable systems. So, I had that exposure into designing real-time scalable applications. That is the reason why I did not have to study a lot of system design for the interviews. But then now, uh, you know, I realized that, for somebody who wouldn't have that exposure for studying system design, I think it would be a good idea to uh, refer different types of books. I do not, I do not kind of evangelize, looking at YouTube videos where you search for a system design question and then you look at a system design question, because any of the system that is built is kind of built using some core components, right? You have some core components, and then, for example, you have databases, you have message queues, you have different types of architectural patterns that you use. You kind of mix match all of those things, and then you come up with a system. It's not the other way around. So having knowledge of those core components is extremely important, according to me, because you can be asked any question in the interview. You will not probably be able to practice all system design interview questions, right? And also, system design questions are pretty subjective. It's a very open-ended question. There is no one right solution to it. It's just how well you design your system that can be scalable and extensible in nature. So yeah, I think studying these different types of books and documents, for example, Designing Data Intensive Applications by Martin Kleppmann is a good book, is a really good book. Although it kind of emphasizes more on the database part of things, but that's a very good eye opener to understand how, how you can actually make your system scalable in nature, reliable in nature, or, highly available, over consistent. And it actually covers a lot of things. So that's a very good book to start off with. Then I have figured that, studying database internals, for me, I have figured that, studying HTTP, there is a book called Definitive Guide by Definitive HTTP, a Definitive Guide. I don't remember the name of the writer, but that book is extremely valuable, according to me. And then you can actually read through different engineering blogs, for example, Netflix blogs. You can read through Uber engineering blogs. You can go through Azure Architecture Center, Amazon's engineering documentations. These are really good. Like, what they do is, I have seen with both Azure and AWS documentation. So whenever they suggest something, right, whenever they're talking about a component, they actually suggest how to efficiently use that component, where to use that component, what efficiencies you can gain from that component, and all of those things. So I have personally felt those documents are really helpful. I also, fortunately, after joining Microsoft, I have access to O'Reilly's website. So, I think I had made a LinkedIn post also that O'Reilly's website is a gold mine. So you go over there, you get all of these books from Neil Ford, Martin Fowler, Mark Richards. You will get great books over there, and you kind of name it, search it, you'll find it. And also for low-level design, I have referenced a lot of books. For example, writing clean code. Then you have Uncle Bob's, Robert C. Martin's book on clean code, and then you have Solid Design Principles. You have Gang of Four books. You have books on design patterns in Java, the head first design pattern in Java, which is really good. So I have realized these things are extremely important, not just to crack interviews, but even become a good software engineer, because how you write code. So this was a paradigm shift from PhonePe to Microsoft. When I was at PhonePe, it was more of a startup ecosystem. So although they had great emphasis on writing good code, good quality code, but still the need of the hour always used to be delivering an application, delivering a system so that it can be up and running as soon as possible. But when I came to Microsoft, I kind of realized that it's not exactly that way. They do emphasize a lot on delivering items, but then you also have to realize that at Microsoft, things need to be maintainable. Let's say when you are building a system, and that should be the mentality when you build a system, that you write code which has to run for, let's say, another 5 years or 8 years, right? So it has to be maintainable in nature. Now, you may not be the same engineer in that same particular team, or you may not even be a part of the organization by that time, right? So somebody else would be coming into the ecosystem and trying to maintain your code or take a look at your code. Now, if your code itself is not readable enough or understandable enough or not designed simple enough, it'll be very difficult to induce errors into your code. So it should be something like that, the code never lies. And so whenever I write code, I try to make sure that, the code is readable in such a way that it reads like an English language. So for example, if is something, then you do something. So you can read it in that way. So that kind of, makes the life of the person who is coming in next and reading your code very easy. So I think there is a line by, I think it's by Martin Fowler only, that, anybody can write a code that can be understood by a computer, but your code should be simple enough that it can be understood by a human being. So yeah, so that's how it's important to write code. Yeah, so this is more of, the software engineering practices that I like to follow. But apart from that, I think all of these things inculcate, if you inculcate all of these things, it will actually reflect when you write code in your interviews also. For example, these days, low-level system design questions are extremely important. So it becomes very important that you structure your code, you come up with, I think single responsibility principle, the S of solid principle, is like, it's extremely important. That's what decides how you model your data, how you model your classes, because that kind of decouples everything, right? That's a start of decoupling. So yeah, it becomes extremely important that you follow the solid principles even in your normal engineering practices, and that will automatically show up when you start preparing for interviews and everything. You do not have to really be worried if you know the principles. So whenever you are asked a question, you can think about the different principles, and automatically you can come up with a very clean code. So yeah, that is very important, is what I feel. And yeah, reading different blogs, so I kind of feel that, I think I had recently made a post also, that learning of anything is more of kind of web crawling. You start with some ideas in mind, and then you come to know of more topics, and then you just do a full recursion of this thing. Right now, it could be breadth first or it could be depth first, but yes, you keep on learning new things over and over again. So yeah, these are the starting points that I would say. Reading about HTTP or HTTP2 or quick protocols, important protocols for that matter. Reading about these architectural design pattern documentations. You can follow different books on O'Reilly. Software engineering practices, software architectural practices. There are vast videos that are made by Neil Ford and Mark Richards on O'Reilly. You can go through them. That should kind of make you well prepared for system design interviews. So to be honest, it's a journey. You keep on learning new things every now and then. There is no real short formula to crack system design interviews. But yeah, getting those components, at least the basic idea of all those components, it becomes very easy to crack interviews, because it's just again mapping of things to use cases.
Yeah.
So yeah, that should be pretty much it.
Yeah, that's amazing, Nayanva. Like, thank you so much for giving us such a beautiful tips and so many good references of some books and all. Thank you so much. Yeah. So moving to the next question, I would like to ask you, like, when we are appearing for such big companies like Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, so what are the common mistakes what candidate do normally when appearing or when preparing for such big companies? So could you highlight some of the points, what we can avoid to do that?
Sure. So yeah, so for preparing, to start with, I think it is very important to focus on quality over quantity. Of course, quantity will give you a lot of confidence, but then quantity should be defined on the quality. Like, let's say you are solving a few quality problems and then you are solving more of those particular patterns, that will help you build confidence. So quality over quantity is extremely important according to me. People tend to solve a lot of problems but not quality problems. Maybe they're not covering the breadth. They're going depth first, but they're not going breadth first. So what happens is, for example, the most common mistake with preparation is, I have heard people saying, sir, I have started practicing arrays and strings, and or let's say I am doing trees and strings. That approach is wrong, because if you see, right, let's say you practice trees for 1 month, and then you practice strings for 1 month, and then you practice another algorithm for 1 month, and you take 3 months of time practicing all of these things. Go back and you see that you would have forgotten trees, for example, because you would have gotten out of touch with that particular algorithm. So not a very good idea is what I feel. You should rather approach your topics breadth first. LeetCode has a very good section of problems segregated by topics. You can choose several topics, and then you can go breadth first on that. That is what I usually suggest people. If you are doing the other way around, going depth first, it can be a problem. Secondly, yeah. So these are the few problems that I see when people actually start preparing for interviews. Second very important point is that this journey is tough. To be very honest, this is not going to be easy. People who become let's say 6-star on Codeforces, or 6-star on CodeChef, or whatever, right? I mean, they actually have been through a very tough journey. It was never easy. Maybe for them, if you are a college student, you have more time. If you are a working professional, you have lesser time. But the toughness is the same. Like, it is going to be tough. So, for example, one more thing that I have seen is people open a question and then they expect themselves to be able to solve that question. That's not going to happen. That is equivalent to saying that you're inventing an algorithm of your own, right? Because let's say, imagine you have never studied Dijkstra's algorithm and you are trying to solve a problem, in that way, without even knowing that, and you're trying to solve that problem, and you implement Dijkstra by yourself without even knowing that, is equivalent to coming up with a new algorithm yourself, right? Because you never read about Dijkstra. So that is not how it goes. So you are meant to fail a lot in the beginning. You are not supposed to be able to solve questions, and that's how it should be. The idea is to actually learn those algorithms, understand the concepts. To be more honest, like, don't mug up a solution. That's not going to help, because there are, I think right now there are 2,400 problems on LeetCode. You cannot remember 2,400 problems. That's not possible. And you may still be asked something that is different out of the book. So, that's not the right approach. So, you learn the concept, understand the concept. Once you are able to, understand the concept properly, then you go ahead and, solve more problems. You will always get a related problem section in LeetCode. So go solve the related questions. That will automatically help you, understand when to implement that particular concept. So there is a how and there is a when, right? How to write a breadth first search question, let's say, or how to implement a breadth first search, or how to implement Dijkstra's, or any algorithm for that matter. It is, about practicing 5 questions, and you are kind of done. You will know the template and everything. But when to apply is what is important. And that only comes with practicing more and more problems of that type. So first quality and then quantity on top of quality. That is an extremely important factor. And yes, you are supposed to be not able to solve problems. If you are able to solve problems, that means you're not upskilling. You are at your level.
Yeah.
You get the point, right? You are only satisfying your own ego by solving those problems which you can solve. That is not taking you to the next level. What is taking you to the next level is something that you didn't know and you're learning now.
Right.
So yeah, so the idea should be to keep upskilling. You come up and learn new, new concepts ways of solving new questions, and that is what will take you to the next level, is what I feel. And yeah, so make sure that you don't get disheartened when you start failing. The first 1.5 months is going to be tough.
Mhm.
Don't I mean, the idea should be to approach strategically and not emotionally. People become extremely emotional at this point in time. So I'm failing. So I have a mark on the wall behind on my this one. It's blood, you'll not be able to see, but that's because I had thrown a chair on my wall because I was so frustrated. And that has happened to me also, and I'm pretty sure that happens with everybody. I become super aggressive, but yeah. So the thing is that it's not going to work out that way. You have to. I have learned the hard way that it has to be strategic. If you're not able to solve a question, you learn. I learn and understand the concept of the question, and then try to implement it the next time. It's better to fail at home than to fail in the interview. So the more things you learn at home, the more your chances are of clearing the interview, right?
Yeah.
And please don't. The third common mistake is people blame it on their luck. I personally believe that luck is something that is defined by your hard work. Because a very simple example: if you have solved only 100 problems, the chances of you getting lucky is much lesser than the person who has solved 4,000 problems, for example. Right? So yeah, I mean, you decide your own luck. uh, Luck, you blaming your luck works, let's say, when you have given the right answer, you're given the most optimized solution, and still you don't clear the interview. That's when you can blame luck. But if a question is not common, that's not when you blame luck. That's like, you have not practiced enough. uh, yeah. And for appearing in the interviews, what happens is it's pretty um, like obvious that, in many cases you may not be able to come up with the exact solution at that point in time. But it is important to let the interviewer know what exactly you're thinking. I think for Facebook's interview, it's not exactly that way, because they kind of expect you to come up with the most optimized solution at one shot. So that's a different version of it. But when I was preparing for Microsoft, I had also interviewed with Google, and I didn't clear the interview. But there I realized that, they want you to actually think through the solutions, explain think out loud. You can come up with a very bad, or a naive solution, and then you can keep on optimizing on top of that, and that is perfectly fine. But as long as you are letting your interviewers know what you are thinking, that thought process, that has a lot of value. I think at Microsoft, when we interview, we do not necessarily want all the time that the candidate comes up with the most optimized solution. It's more to see how well the person is able to think of it. And then we do give some hints, and automatically the candidate sometimes is able to come up with a solution, and we are perfectly fine with that. Because picking up hints is very important. That kind of means, every interview has a behavioral side to it, right? We tend to check the adaptability of a person. For example, if I give you a tip and you are able to accept that tip and build on top of that, that kind of is equivalent to saying that, you are open to taking up suggestions, and you are able to implement it in your code, or in your software, or whatever it is like. So that's a plus point. We see that as a plus point. It's not always necessary that you will come up with the most optimized solution all the time. There can be people in the team who can suggest you better options, and if you are able to take that up and implement that, that is a very good thing to that's a plus point actually in your this one. So yeah, thinking out loud is very important. And yeah, taking care of the edge cases, and also sometimes you make sure that you are dry running after you have written the code. Because often what happens is, like, at a very high level, silly mistakes can backfire. For example, if you do not have a null pointer check or a null pointer exception check, and your code is throwing a null pointer exception, that could act as a negative side of your
Yeah.
development. Yeah, so those are the things. For system design, I think it is pretty okay to sometimes not know something. You can call it out, saying that, okay, this is something that I am not aware of, and that should be pretty fine. One thing that I would want to say that I missed out in the previous thing is that in the previous question is that, whenever you are appearing for system design questions, especially low level system design questions, make sure that you are taking into consideration concurrency problems. People do not usually take into consideration concurrency problems, and that is a dangerous thing, because we definitely want to check concurrency issues. When you are building at very, very high scale, concurrency issues will come up every now and then. And if you do not have the basic understanding of concurrency, that can act as a negative point. So, for example, I was recently interviewing somebody, and I figured out this thing where I had asked a question as to how he or she would handle a concurrency issue on a map when you're trying to write it in a normal hash map. And the person suggested that I'll go ahead and implement a lock on the map. And I said that if you implement a lock on the map, then you're actually sequentializing the entire process. Every thread in the ecosystem who is trying to access the map will be sequential, and that will add to your latency. That can be a huge bottleneck when you are actually building a highly scalable system. So yeah, these kind of things are extremely important to be taken care of, right? That is what I feel. I missed out in there and missed out there, so I thought I'll just say it over here.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's a good point, Nayanva. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, that's, I mean, it's a consistent effort which you have to put towards like.
Yeah, yes, you keep learning eventually, and yeah, that's how it is.
And then, like you have spoken about upskilling yourself, like when we are doing our daily day-to-day job. So what do you do for yourself to keep yourself up to date, or like what all things you do for upskilling yourself?
Right. So I actually, try to, I'll not say I do, but I try to read through documents, as I said, the architecture, Azure Architecture Design, Architecture Center, Amazon's architectural blogs, then, going through these O'Reilly books, right? And then looking at videos. I think Martin Kleppmann has a series of videos on distributed systems that you can find on YouTube. You have this Tech Talks, which I think from InfoQ. Then you have from I'm unable to recall the names, but there is this awesome guy named Tim Buglen, and he has got some videos on distributed systems and all of these things. I often, so when I had started, I had started out checking this CS 130. There is a video of scalability by David Malan. That's a lecture video in MIT. You can find it on YouTube itself. In that course, that's the last class, mostly 9th or 12th class is a scalability class. I suggest anybody who is just starting out to watch that video first. That will give a very very good idea as to how you start thinking from one single computer, having a CPU, having an IP address, to building a complete data center, how things scale out to data centers and how data centers are built and all of those things. Like a very high level overview, but a very good overview. That's what I suggest everybody. And yeah, for my thing, I try to keep reading up different stuffs and keep involving with a lot of people. I usually try to keep my posts more on the technical side in LinkedIn these days, and that opens up a lot of new learning from other people. So I had recently made a post on Swiggy where I said that their food delivery system is not a real-time delivery system. They actually make HTTP polls, like regular polling to fetch the data. Maybe an AJAX polling for sure. Yeah, it is an AJAX polling. So, but they do make requests to the server to fetch the driver's detail. And then from there, I came to know about a lot of things. Like somebody suggested that Gojek, they implemented using MQTT protocol on top of Oasis. And then some suggested that, WebSocket may not always be a very good solution because, yeah, for obvious reasons, there can be Thunderheart and all of these issues. But yeah, so you get to know about a lot of things from a lot of different people, which you wouldn't know. So that's what I try to read Medium articles. Also, I do not always completely believe in Medium articles. Um, but what I do is I try to take the gist out of it, and then I try to explore and see if there are books on top of it. So I am old school. I wasn't a very good reader, but I realized that you have to read to actually know things better, because there are experts who write books, and when a book has been written by an expert, it is better to follow that than to read something which may not be 110% right. So yeah, so that's how I deal with my time. I tend to keep half an hour a day to read anything that is possible. Yeah, so I try to take notes, and so basically okay, I'll just take another 1 minute, 1.5 minutes. So there is this developer to architect.com website that is run by Mark Richards. So in that, he has this one video as to how you improve and come to know about more and more things. So he says that it's a pyramid where the topmost portion, which is the small portion, is what you know, and then you have a middle portion which is a little bigger, and that is what you know that you don't know. And then there is a very big portion below the triangle which says the things that you don't know that you don't know. Now, and that is a vast area, right? And it is not possible for everybody to know everything, or everybody to even know what they don't know. So what he suggests is that you keep reading some things which you don't know that you don't know. Could be signing up for newsletters or articles or anything. And then what you can do is you can skim through those articles and then figure out, okay, this is something that I don't know, and you take a note of, okay, maybe this is something that I need to read up about. So you move it to things you know that you don't know, and then you maybe on a Saturday or a Sunday, on a weekend, you figure out time for yourself, and then you clear out that backlog, and then you move it to the things that you know. So yeah, so that is a very good structured way of thinking, and I feel that to achieve that, you have to be you have to spend some time, maybe every day or over the weekends, at least 2 to 3 hours, maybe. I mean, that's up to every individual. I am a very slow reader, so I need a lot of time. And yeah, and also if possible, getting hands-on into things. Let's say anything. Hussein Nasir's videos are pretty good for getting hands-on, is what I realized. So the other day I was trying to study about protocol buffers and gRPC. So kind of built a small application on top of gRPC to understand how streamings are done, how server streaming, client streaming happens. And then out of curiosity, I was thinking, okay, if gRPC is already supporting streamings, then why would I need a WebSocket? And so all of these questions, right? And you come up with different sorts of curious questions, and then you read about those things. And then I realized, okay, it's not about gRPC, but it's about HTTP2. The protocol in itself supports streaming. And then there are different flaws of this over that. And that's why people may use WebSockets, for example. So yeah, like those are the things, you get curious and then you get to learn. Yeah. So that's how I approach that's how I try to upskill myself. Although I'm not like, I think I'm extremely chaotic. I'm not really sorted, but yeah, trying to develop a practice where, at least you get to learn things every now and then. that is pretty helpful. Sometimes it happens that when you are in some sort of a discussion and somebody says something and you are like, okay, I read it somewhere. So it's like that kind of makes you think more. Okay, I know that I don't know that thing, and okay, you got to move it to. So I think in a recent discussion in office, we were talking about this cross-region token access, like cross-server token access, where different because if you save a token in a cookie, then there is a chance that that token can be used by some other website. So how do you handle all of those use cases? And basically CSRF attacks is what it is called. So yeah, I mean, you read and then and even when people discuss, you come to know, and then you get curious about that particular thing. And yeah, so that's how I try to upskill myself. Yeah,
Yeah, so
I
that's
do practice a bit of coding these days,
great.
just to be in touch. I love doing these lead code contests. Not a very good problem solver, but yeah, trying to get better at it. I mean, even I also come up with learning new algorithms. Like recently, I learned one algorithm how to use OR across multiple elements in multiple nodes in O of one time, basically. So constant time, not O of, I mean O of one, yeah, constant time, basically. 32 bits is what you need. So yeah, that's how I try to upskill myself, and then I feel happy. Okay, I learned something new today.
Yeah, even I'm very happy that I learned so many things from you today. Yeah, so
Glad
yeah,
to know
thank you
that.
for telling all these things. Yeah, thank you. So Nayan, I have one more question for you. You have like around 7 to 8 years of experience. So
Right.
throughout your experience, what are your topmost learnings? What you have learned across this journey? What would you like to
Right.
share with us? Yeah.
So topmost learnings would be um, the thing is initially, when I started out, I was a QA engineer, and then I quickly realized that I would want to move into development. And then when I moved to development, I kind of realized that, okay, I know nothing about development. I have no idea about distributed systems and all of these things. And then I started to develop this knack of, whenever I pick up a task, I try to understand the overall effect of that. So, and that's a very important learning according to me. You tend to understand why you are doing it, or it's not just about only that problem, but the entire uh, entire ecosystem that is actually being affected by the problem that you're trying to solve. And that kind of gives you a better overview of what you are doing and why you are doing it. These are the things that I initially didn't have in my career. Like the first 1.5, 2 years when I was at Snapdeal, I wouldn't know all of those things. But when I moved to PhonePe and I started looking at their architecture, then I started to realize, okay, that things are way beyond just that one API that you write, or uh, any single individual component that you build. Because when I joined PhonePe was pretty new, and PhonePe's entire refer and earn was written by me at that time. The referral program of PhonePe, not the in-house referral. Basically, you can refer somebody, you can refer a friend, and once a friend does something, you earn some cashback, right? And then I was also part of the cashback ecosystem, the uh, cashbacks that you used to get in the very beginning of PhonePe. And then when Hotstar Watch and Play went live, PhonePe's integration with that part. So did quite a few things, and then I started to realize that it's just beyond coding. There are a lot more things that actually come into play. So you need to be aware of the ecosystem that you are working in. For example, even if you're working in a distributed system, you should be able to understand what are the different types of challenges that comes up when you are developing scalable applications, and yeah, like, so that you can avoid common mistakes. So you can avoid common mistakes by being aware of what is the ecosystem around you, right? What would fit in, what would not fit in. So yeah, all of these things. This is one important learning. Second important learning that I recently had after coming to Microsoft is that you understand the solid design principles. It's very important. I'm not talking about design patterns. Design patterns can, there are a lot of design patterns and you may not necessarily implement all of these design patterns every day in your code, right? But the solid design principles, right? Single responsibility principle, open close principle, cost substitution principle is a little complicated. I mean, people may not necessarily need that a lot. But yeah, I mean, dependency inversion and what is this interface segregation. Yeah, so these four principles I think are extremely important. Every object oriented programming, I mean, any backend engineer who is working on object oriented programming language would need to make use of these. That will make their code way more readable, way more maintainable, way more decoupled, and way more scalable, to be honest, like when the need comes. So and less prone to changes. So if codes are coupled, basically what happens is when you make some change to some file, you have to make changes to the other file also, but that is not how it should be, right? If that is an individual component, that's why you have abstraction, right? So that if you have abstracted out something, if the internals of that thing changes, the other part of the ecosystem doesn't get affected.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, all of those things, I think solid principle becomes extremely important when it comes to object oriented programming language. So whenever you design or whenever you write code, I think solid principle is very important, something that I've started following a lot. And yeah, and keeping yourself updated is going to be very helpful. You should be updated with not necessarily the technology, for example, but yeah, I think you can say technology as well, but more importantly about the ecosystem, as I said, right? It's very important to understand the ecosystem that you're working in and learning more and more on that ecosystem, going a little deeper in that ecosystem. And the most important learning that I've had is, if you do not understand one single computer properly, you will never be able to not understand. If you do not know a single computer properly, then it will be very difficult for you to actually understand thousands of computers and how they work with each other. For example, if you do not understand about the threading model, the operating system threading model, and all of those things, right, it can be very painful. It will become painful because issues at scale hit at that level. Thread levels, memory levels, network bandwidth levels are the levels where you actually start seeing your issues. Issues don't always show up in your code. Maybe you will be, it will show up in the code, but the thing is, when you're writing the code, you'll not be able to realize it. And when the issue hits in, also, you will not be able to realize it because you do not have that knowledge in depth to understand, okay, this is where it can break, right? You may just be looking at the upper level at your code, but not able to understand, so basically you are at a superficial level, but the issue is much deeper into the roots. So you get to know all of those things only when you study more. So I can give an example, actually a couple of examples. So when I was working with PhonePe, I remember one of these issues had come up where the producer was producing messages. This is a RabbitMQ issue that had come up. I think RabbitMQ internally implements AMQP protocol, and RabbitMQ internally has this, or AMQP protocol internally provides this flow control. So it can ask the producer not to publish this many messages because your consumers are not able to consume them. So what was happening was those messages were not showing in the portal, or RabbitMQ has a good portal, right? So you can take a look at that. But those messages were not showing up. But then at night, we realized that those messages were getting cleared up. And that was because there was a huge latency that got built up, and then the messages were later on cleared up. And again, in the morning, the same thing showed up. So these issues, you will not be able to understand if you just look at the code. You'll only feel that, okay, where are the messages going is the question. This is one of the examples. And then recently at Microsoft also, when we were working on a system basically, which handles around 25 million requests per minute. C# has this brilliant asynchronous programming model. So what happens is, you make sure that you are not blocking your code or your CPU threads. Basically, your threads are not getting blocked on network operations. The CPU threads the application threads can make efficient use of CPU by performing only CPU intensive operations and delegate the job of IO to the IOCP threads. So once the message comes back from the network, the thread is not blocked at that point in time. It is continuing to perform the CPU operations. What happens is basically your IOCP threads or the operating system threads, they basically let your application know that, okay, there is a message. This message has been completed. You can start processing beyond this. Now, when you are handling a scale of 25 million requests per minute, that is around 400K requests per second. That is more than that, 432K requests per second, which is huge, right? So you cannot have a single, if you are blocking threads at that point in time, you will start to see, catastrophe on your system, literally. And that is what was happening at a much lower volume. We had just rolled it out to much lesser folks and we started seeing those problems. So when I started digging into the code base that was implemented, I started realizing that, okay, there were all these blocking calls. When you go ahead and update those blocking calls, as and when we modified those blocking calls, optimized for the IOCP threads, that's what it's called in your Windows. I think it's called ePOL in in Linux. So you basically go ahead and optimize on those threads, and we started. So we had around, I think, 70 plus machines, and we were not able to handle that traffic of 250K requests per minute. And then we later on, after all this fine tuning and improvement in the code base, we started handling around 225K requests per minute with only five instances. So that was the kind of optimization that we saw after making all of those fine tunings and changes. So those things only will come when you have deeper understanding of how the underlying machine works or the operating system works, because that has a lot to offer. Everything is it's like you have hardwares, and then you have instruction sets, and then you have like operating systems and all of those things which are sitting on top of that, right? So they have something to provide, and you are basically making use of something that's already present, and then you are designing your systems or writing your code or whatever, right? So you're taking help of those hardware and those softwares ultimately. So if you do not understand them properly, then it becomes very difficult to be able to scale or write efficient code, is what I feel. So it's very important that you understand that one single computer very well.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's not only about code. There is so many other things we need to learn, like deeper knowledge of the things. Yeah.
So I think there was this one saying, right? Developing a feature is easy. Making a feature performant is the hardest part.
Exactly.
So syntax and all, you can always find it on this one, on Stack Overflow or whatever. But yeah, those things like the internal details or what to search for is something that you will have to figure out yourself.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and thank you so much, Nayanwa. Like that is an amazing conversation. I mean, we got to know so many things, and like as I mentioned, it's not only the lead code or the coding things. There's so many other things which you have highlighted, like system design, getting deeper into the things, and getting so many detailed knowledge, and like referring so many books and all. So all those things are like really helpful. Definitely, I mean, it will help others as well. So I really wish this video helps others, and thank you so much, and we wish you very all the best for your future. And yeah, thank you so much for giving us time. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.